Hello, and welcome to Cutting Through, where we present analysis of foreign policy and domestic politics that cuts through the noise of corporate and ideologically driven media. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can subscribe to Cutting Through at mitchellplitnick.substack.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber or donate to support this work. And you can share Cutting Through with your friends and contacts at that site, and that really helps too. I should warn everyone, uh, this um, this video deals with issues of sexual assault. So um, if that's something that is particularly triggering for you, you have been warned and you can stop now. Um, but it's important and it's difficult uh, to discuss these things. And well, today we've been given new reason to do it. So, the esteemed and well-known uh, activist and writer Fatima Bhutto published an incredibly important piece in Zeteo today. Basically, she talked about the fact that we are not paying any attention virtually at all in the West to allegations and testimonies of Palestinian, particularly women, who have been sexually assaulted during and long before this current iteration of the conflict, of the occupation, of the genocide, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And she offers a powerful, I think, indictment of Western feminism that privileges uh, certain victims of sexual assault over others, basically by race, by if they're in the global north, global south, the various different, fairly obvious, I think, dividing lines that we have in many, many ways. And again, it's a difficult subject. For nearly 18 months, there have been debates about sexual assault on October 7th. And that is not a trivial discussion. It's a very, very important one. These are serious accusations, and there's legitimate reasons to believe both that sexual assault, including rape, occurred that day, but also um, there is clear evidence that those incidents have been greatly embellished and exaggerated by Israel, that they have been used and uh, and blown up in order to inflame feeling against the Palestinians, to reinforce and play on pretty standard, I think, anti-Muslim and especially anti-Arab stereotypes of not just misogyny, but a sort of predatory attitude towards women sexually. And it's been a key tool, really, in motivating not only Israelis, but many in the West to support the genocide that we have been witnessing in Gaza ever since that horrible day. I mean, we know that there have been numerous false accusations, uh, other accusations that have not been proven false, but have no substantiation, and that's actually been a great many of them. And just a lot of incendiary rhetoric that's just not backed by evidence. And we're hearing a lot from Israel about these things about, well, we don't trust the United Nations, or we don't trust the international community, or we don't trust the media. All these different reasons why they're not presenting evidence that they have at times at least claimed to have to substantiate these accusations. Given the stakes, I think evidence is warranted, and we always do want to believe women, and that is important. We're actually not being given women to believe. We have heard from several women who were in captivity and have been released from captivity in Gaza, who did talk about sexual abuse, and I think that's clear. And I don't doubt their stories. I think that did happen, but the key issue around October 7th has been that it was systematic. There were many, many people, unfortunately, who came through the Gaza fence on October 7th, did many horrible things. Um, and it is important whether how widespread sexual assault was and whether or not that was actually part of the plan, or was it just because many of the people who came through were from many different groups. Some weren't from any groups at all and just you know came through and they opportunistically. And Israel has not been cooperative in attempts to investigate what exactly happened. There are many reasons, but certainly one of them seems to be that they don't seem to want to share the evidence of what actually occurred. And we're just supposed to take Israeli authorities' word for these things. In many cases, for example, we had one case where we were hearing about, well, autopsies showed sexual assault, but those announcements were made by the police, not by forensic experts, medical examiners, any of that. That's not who we heard from. It's very, very suspicious and very, very suspect. Um, of course, it's almost impossible to prove a negative, and so the debates have raged on. And I think that's hurtful to everybody. um, we're left to wonder, what actually happened here, what the reality was. And yet, we do have testimonies of Palestinian women and men, and unfortunately children, um, who have been sexually assaulted by Israelis. Um, those people have come forward, and it has not generated anything like the outrage um, that we heard. I mean, there's one doctor was literally raped to death. Uh, where was the outrage over that? Where was the screaming over that? Um, I didn't hear it. Where's the outrage? The UN just released a report which I wrote up, uh, and I'll say a little more about it later, but about gendered and sexual violence, and there's been no response to that. This gendered and sexual violence that was committed by Israel directed against Palestinians. There's been no response from the West on this. Um, we are just not hearing that kind of outrage, and I, I certainly agree with Ms. Bhutto that this is a clear case of a double standard. She makes some really important points, does Bhutto, in her piece, which focuses at the start on testimony given to the United Nations on sexual abuse of Palestinian women that got virtually no coverage in the West. And she says this, and I'm quoting here, quote, earlier this month, Kefaya Chaim, and I'm sorry if I butchered that name, from the Palestinian NGO, the Women's Center for Legal Aid and Counseling, and another advocate for Palestinian women, who was not named, testified at a UN commission of inquiry on the Palestinian women facing, quote, systematic sexual violence and intimidation by Israeli forces. This is where she ends her quote, but I'm continuing to quote her now. Chaim began her statement by recounting the story of a home invasion in the occupied West Bank in July 2023, when female soldiers with large dogs forced Palestinian women to undress and, quote, made them walk around the house naked, unquote. I think it's very important that we note this was before October 7th, and this was in the West Bank. Bhutto goes on, quote, women are routinely sexually abused during home invasions by the Israeli military. They're forced to disrobe, sometimes in front of their male relatives, and adopt humiliating poses for the soldiers to film them, Chaim said. There have been many incidents over the years where human rights or women's organizations have reported sexual abuse of Palestinian women, girls, men, and boys by Israeli soldiers. Exceedingly few ever hit the news in the US, Europe, or Israel. Indeed, when the Defense of Children International in Palestine reported on a case in 2021 of a 15-year-old boy having been sexually abused in detention by Israeli authorities, Israel responded with a swift and harsh crackdown on DCI, harassing their employees, seizing their equipment, breaking into their offices, and it culminated in their being designated as a quote terrorist organization. Now, you may not like DCI, but calling them a terrorist organization is absolutely insane. And then again, why you would not like an organization that is dedicated to the defense of children raises its own questions. Recently, the UN released a report on sexual violence and gendered violence against Palestinians by Israel, and they labeled it an act of genocide. And as I said, I covered that at Cutting Through. You can find it there. Um, it was, I believe, around March 15th, so just about 2 weeks ago. Bhutto recounts also various hoaxes that have remained part of the public narrative, such as the infamous New York Times piece, Screams Without Words, which detailed the alleged rape of an Israeli woman who was killed on October 7th. But that account was quickly refuted by the woman's own grieving family. The fact that they had to do that having already lost their daughter, their wife, their sister, they had to then deal with the New York Times scamming them in their interviews and publishing a story that they did not agree with. And of course, some in the family do believe that she was sexually assaulted. Others, especially those who actually spoke with her while she was being abducted, and horrifyingly while she was about to be killed, believe that it could not possibly have happened. That's why we know the story is not true. There just wasn't any time for it. It's obscene to put a family through that. Absolutely obscene. And the Times didn't just put them through that, they short-circuited their own editorial process, put in reporters and editors who were either incredibly biased or completely unprepared professionally to handle a story like this, in order to publish it over the objections of much of its own staff. And eventually they had to retract it. Their own podcast wouldn't discuss it. It was such an obvious sham. But these are real people that they hurt, people who had already, thank you very much, been through enough. I'm talking about the Israeli family here. Not to be outdone, the former COO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, who knows a thing or two about hoaxes, made her own film about cases that by the time the movie came out had already been debunked. But people saw the movie and they hadn't been following these issues on a day-to-day basis, most of them. These things stick in the public mind and they all contribute to an overall atmosphere. And at the same time, the absence of reporting on what Palestinians have endured in this regard. This is not a question of competition, but when you only report the crimes of one side, people have a very strong impression that only one side is committing those crimes. And that has an effect on policy. That's what's important. It's not how many did this do or who did what, or the fact that you're only talking about the one side, about the Israeli victims. However, and even putting aside all of the falsehoods and the embellishments and the incendiary rhetoric that was clearly and intentionally manipulated to justify the genocide, even putting that aside, just the fact that our media is not reporting on these things happening also to Palestinians creates a certain image of who the innocents are and who the villains are. And when you're talking about supporting a genocide, or even if we don't use that word, just supporting a war where an extremely powerful military, a regional superpower like Israel, is just routinely bombing the hell out of one of the most densely populated and poorest places on the entire planet, with no means to defend itself in any significant way. That kind of propaganda is murderous and inexcusable. Bhutto goes on to make another point that I think is very key, and I want to be very clear. Her article goes into a lot more detail that I am not going into here. You can read it if you want. I will link it. Uh, it'll be linked in the email I sent out. It'll be linked on my website. It'll be linked on YouTube to read her article on Zeteo. But a lot of these details are really harsh and disturbing and difficult to hear. So I'm not getting into a lot of that. And it's important if people can read it that you do. But she makes a key point, and I'm quoting her again here. In January, Moran Gaz of the Israeli prosecutor's office admitted to the Israeli outlet Yediot Achronot that no one had come forward to her office with allegations against Hamas of rape or sexual assault. Gaz told the paper that her office had even gone so far as to seek out the cooperation of women's rights organizations, and, quote, they told us that no one had approached them. Some of you may remember when that very article came out. It's damning. It's damning. And Bhutto makes a point that I should have made a long time ago, and I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't think of this, but it's a true and key point. She says this happened, I'm adding that word, in a society where Israeli women have come out to accuse a former defense minister of sexual assault and a former president of rape, both of whom were convicted. Now, when we're making allegations of widespread sexual assault, no woman can be, or man for that matter, no victim can be expected, or certainly much less required, to come forward, relive that trauma, face embarrassment, perhaps ridicule from some narrow-minded corners. Um, who knows what other sort of social stigma might be experienced. But if you're talking about that many people that it supposedly happened to, the idea that that every single one of them was killed is not consistent with the facts of October 7th and what we know happened that day. We know there were a great many survivors. It's also not consistent with just statistical sampling. Some of these women would have come forward at least anonymously, maybe not to go on TV and to share their name and to go public, but the idea that nobody came to the prosecutor, nobody came even to women's rights organizations to disclose that this had happened to them, no one reached out for help. I mean, we know that a lot of people got a lot of support for the trauma, the massive trauma that they underwent on October 7th. There were entire news centers set up for it in Israel. And yet, the head of the Israeli prosecutor's office couldn't find one person to testify, even completely anonymously, in a country where women had come out against very, very powerful men and brought them down. It beggars belief. It does. Again, none of this is to suggest we know certain things did happen. We do. We have heard credible testimony. The UN gathered some testimony and presented a report that confirmed that they had enough evidence to have reasonable ground that multiple incidents did happen of sexual assault, but they were not prepared to make too grand an accusation. Now, Israel would not cooperate with them, and they didn't see the evidence to sustain anything like the kinds of claims that Israel has made of these widespread, massive sexual assaults. But more importantly, we don't hear about the Palestinian women who are coming forward, who are saying what happened, who are having their voices represented at the United Nations. Yet somehow that doesn't make it into our media, and it needs to. It needs to, not only because of the blatant racism that this reflects, but also because of what this entire line of thought is fueling in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Israel's increased aggression throughout the region. Bhutto closes by saying, and I'm quoting her again, Western hypocrisy is alive and well and thoroughly unrepentant. Women's bodies are only sacred when they can be used as props to further Western imperial designs, and rape is only a crime and an outrage when it serves Western political interests. She's right. And it's so important. Look, the experiences and putting out there what happened to Palestinian women does nothing to diminish the experiences, the very real experiences that Israeli women had. And getting to the truth of what happened on October 7th and what happened to Israelis in captivity. Getting all of the truth, which means any crimes that were committed against them, and any lies that were made up about this, all of it, does nothing but honor the actual experiences of those who went through it, Israeli and Palestinian. Acknowledging the pain of Palestinian women does not diminish in any way or compromise in any way any of the realities of Israeli women, any more than the reverse would be true. On the contrary, only by treating all sexual assault as the inexcusable and intolerable crime it is can we get to a place where justice for all victims, or indeed any victims, can be found. There is never an excuse for sexual assault, never any reason. There's no such thing as sexual assault in self-defense. Okay, there's there is actually even no conceivable justification for taking this act, unlike where one can say someone's coming to kill me and so I used force to stop them. There's nothing like that when it comes to sexual assault. So there's never an excuse. But to use sexual assault and the experiences of women and of men, because it has happened, it has clearly happened to men as well. We have heard these reports from Zeteo and from other Israeli prisons. We know what men have gone through. To use that as a propaganda tool is almost as depraved and hurtful as the act itself. And I couldn't agree more with Fatima Bhutto in pointing out the shameless hypocrisy of how we have treated the claims. There have been some substantiated ones, but also many, many unsubstantiated claims of Israelis versus the many claims, and in many cases where we do have much more substantiation, from Palestinians. So I'll leave it there. I welcome comments, contributions. Again, please like and subscribe so we can continue having these important conversations. Some of you have messaged me about my intention to initiate conversations on sort of the potential future of Judaism apart from Zionism, and sort of that inside Jewish community conversation, and that I'm expecting to start in the next week or two. So hopefully you look forward to that, and do what you can to share these videos, and what you can to get by during these very, very difficult periods. Thank you.